All right, my friends, though we wanted to finish Ulysses last class, we really didn't have enough time to do so and to do so effectively. So today we are going to launch into including both the second part of Ulysses, the so-called wanderings of Ulysses, and also introduce and conclude all on the same day, the so-called third part or the third part of Ulysses called the Nostos. Remember that Nostos is the Greek word for a return home. So that nostalgia, a word that a compound word in our own language that joins together two Greek words, is a return pain, a homesickness. Is how we often define it. So a pain because of a reminiscence of home. And of course, always the quote put into our minds whenever we use the term home is, can one ever go home again? Which will be certainly a question that Odysseus faces himself, returning to Ithaca in disguise, being unrecognized, and having to himself infiltrate his own home and family, lying to his son, his father, and his wife, respectively, as well as his own nursemaid who helped raise him, and one of his excellent swineherd, Eumaeus. When Odysseus returns to his home 20 years after he left it, it is very different from the place that he left. His son, infant, is now an adult. His dog, young and ready for life, dies in front of him. Argos, very sad. And his wife, is she faithful or is she unfaithful? The question for Bloom. We know for a fact, and there will be clear indications in his home, that a man has been there. 2 cigarettes have been lit. There are multiple glasses left on the table. The furniture in his home has been moved around, and there is actually clear indication of male seminal fluid on his otherwise clean bed itself. And so, in the same way that Odysseus must ask the question, can he return home? Is the place Ithaca with his manor and with his wife, is it home? Is he still father to Telemachus? Is he still master of his servants? Is he even still master of his own house? And is he really even truly still husband to Penelope, or has she taken a lover in order to replace him? And so to return home for both Odysseus and Bloom is to confront the major questions of the day, questions of identity. Is he the same person in returning to this place that he was when he left? I think at least with Bloom and Odysseus, the answer is clearly no, and yet both are tasked with the monumental task of reasserting themselves in their home, of taking back that which has been usurped from them. In any case, last class, we finished briefly talking about the anti-Semitism of the citizen. Remember his name, the citizen, when you think of names and identities. Thinking about Don Quixote, the underground man, we now have the citizen as well, and his anti-Semitic vitriol. Also his correlation to Polyphemus the Cyclops, in the same way that Polyphemus is first myopic, one-eyed, incapable of seeing with any depth or depth perception, and then is in fact blinded by an olive branch by Odysseus and his men. So is the anti-Semitic citizen himself blind to what? His ability to help those around him, his ability to bring about an Irish revival, the fact that he is now, and this is sort of sad, myself being an athlete and always worried of this fate, to be the has-been, as it were. When he throws the biscuit box at Bloom, is he coming off like an epically powerful, titanic Cyclops of godlike strength, or does he look like a feeble, blinded by the sun, old man whose day has passed him by? Is his relationship to what the Cyclops is very much an ironic, negative relationship, in the same way that Bloom is cast in a Christ-like way? Recall that Bloom is accused of being a Jew and also a Zionist Jew, and in fact, he does have some relationship to Judaism, and he is, as we know, he comes from a Jewish father, but remember also that he's first baptized as a Protestant, second baptized by his friends, and as sort of a joke, and then later baptized as a Catholic in order to marry Molly. So again, this citizen, like so many of the characters throughout Dublin, is blind to who Bloom truly is, in the same way that the Pharisees and the Romans, including Pontius Pilate and Caiaphas, the high priest, were blind to the fact that Jesus, himself a Jew, as Bloom here accurately claims, was the Son of God. And so what does the citizen say to Bloom to ultimately apostatize or venerate him or identify him with a great Christian figure? He says, "By Jesus," twice, using the names, God's name in vain. I'll brain him. I'll bloody crucify him. And so, who also do we know from history who was a Jewish individual who was unjustly crucified by those who didn't know his worth? That would be one Jesus, seeing things that way. So the Cyclops utterly subverts what he attempts to do. Through his anti-Semitism, he wishes to diminish the value and the importance and the sense of belonging of Bloom. And yet, by his own metrics as a Christian, he ends up venerating Bloom as the top possible figure. And there's so something there about the paradox of hate. And so attempting to destroy something through one's vitriol, one can create fertile grounds for turning it into something more powerful than one could imagine. Sort of the claim that Obi-Wan Kenobi makes near the end of Star Wars: A New Hope, when he is fighting Darth Vader and very curiously takes a pacifist role after wielding a lightsaber for, the vast majority of his life, as it were. In any case, we see here a study in contrasts when we move to chapter 13. Bloom has just in some way been identified with a figure of Christ, and then yet so quickly after this, though, keep in mind that we've now traveled 3 hours and find ourselves now post-coitum rather than anti-coitum, at least when it comes to Boylan and Molly. Now, now we have Bloom on a seaside, or excuse me, on the cliffs, in front of a few girls, one Gertie McDowell, Sissy McCaffrey, and Edie Boardman, very nymph-like, like Nausicaa. And we will see him ogle and the opposite of self-flagellate, self-fondle himself. So I just want you to take a moment to enjoy perhaps the bitter contrast here. Bloom is, by the citizen, through his anti-Semitic screed, identified with Jesus, something of a holy figure, but will, in this very chapter, act in a very let's say, patriarchally Jewish way. In the same way that the dictum is said, "Go forth and multiply," in the Jewish Bible, the Old Testament. So in that same testament, do we have the story of Onan. Onan was a figure or rather, so the story is that there was a man and he had a wife, and when he died, the wife was then to marry the brother. But the brother, not wanting the property of the original father to then be inherited by the son of this new woman and wanting it for himself, rather than inseminating her and creating a son who would then inherit the property, inseminates the ground. This is called coitus interruptus, traditionally speaking, and it is a story of attempting to defraud someone. But a more traditional understanding of the story arose, which is that this is the source text for the biblical prohibition against particularly masculine self-fondling unto eruption, as it were. And so, Bloom is, in chapter 12, cast as a messianic figure, just to, in chapter 13, be cast as a sort of a negative Old Testament figure. There is much more to this individual than simply a biblical symbol, and simply a biblical symbol that means one thing. That's so above, so below, you might say. In any case, chapter 13. I want you to enjoy the pastoral embrace of these few lines. And and feel the sort of warm beauty of these words, because this is supposed to be something of a pastoral love we see, where this handsome bloom, we find out is handsome here, and also very tall for his time, 5'9.5", puts him above the minimum height to be a Dublin police officer, who were, according to James Heffernan, considered a race of giants. He said to be a big person to be in law enforcement, to be intimidating. Bouncers are these days, and Bloom's actually a big guy. And he's near these three ladies who are themselves with three children, two twins, the Caffreys, and another, and there will soon be fireworks. My goodness, both sort of personal fireworks for Bloom, as well as actual fireworks in the sky. But the summer evening had begun to fold the world in its mysterious embrace. Far away in the west, the sun was setting, and the last glow of all too fleeting day lingered lovingly on sea and strand, on the proud promontory of dear old Howe, guarding as ever the waters of the bay on the weed-grown rocks along sandy Mount shore. And last but not least, on the quiet church, whence there streamed forth at times from stillness the voice of prayer to her who is in her pure radiance, a beacon over to the storm-tossed heart of man. Mary, star of the sea. My goodness. And that is our scene for the three girls sitting on the rocks, enjoying the evening scene. Sissy Caffrey, Edie Boardman, and Gertie McDowell. And here's a quote about Gertie, just to frame her a little. Gertie McDowell, who was seated near her companions, lost in thought, gazing far away into the distance, was a very fair specimen of winsome Irish girlhood, as one could wish to see. She was pronounced beautiful by all who knew her, though. As folks often said, she was more Gael-trapped than a McDowell. So she's a winsome, fair Irish lass, sort of archetypally speaking. How does this relate to the Odyssean or Ulyssian character Nausicaa? Who is Nausicaa in Ulysses? I've mentioned to you before that Ulysses, Odysseus, is a bit of a ladies' man. That he spends 1 year with the sea witch Circe, occupying her bed, 7 years with the sea goddess Calypso, daughter of Atlas, sharing her bed. And one time he finds himself washed up on a shore after 18 days on a raft, and then 3 days hanging to a board after a terrible storm has tossed him and destroyed his raft in the water onto a beam of his former raft. He finds himself onto an island called Scheria, where there's a young princess who wakes up in the morning and just has this feeling that she needs to ask her dad to take her laundry down to a stream and wash it. Keep in mind that this is the site of major mythological battles going down to a stream. This is where pirates or thieves can abscond with one as a woman. In fact, one of the great stories that we think is very much tied to the Greek religion, the Eleusinian mysteries, is so-called abduction or rape of Persephone, which itself takes place down in a stream with a cadre of women hanging out with each other. In any case, Nausicaa is of marriageable age. She asks her dad whether she can clean her clothes. This is a bit that you actually give in the Odyssey. Knows what she's really asking, which is to be prepared. Now, is he prepared to allow her to leave his home? Is he prepared to accept the consequences? The fact that she is now preening and is eager to find a young man and then move out from under her father's authority. And the answer seems to be yes, because he lets her go. While she is down at the stream, she is playing a game of ball with her attending ladies, and they throw the ball, and it falls into the water, and they all scream. Their scream awakens the sleeping Odysseus, who has himself slept under 2 olive bushes that night. So keep in mind, he's been at sea for 18 days, and then in the sea for 3 days, and then he sleeps in the nude underneath some soil, underneath a bush. He's not looking his best. He's not in appropriate garb to meet a princess, and yet wakes up He goes out and he approaches this princess, looking a bit like a ragman, as it were, from later medieval times, or one of a monster like David Lynch would come up with, who lives behind a dumpster in Mulholland Drive. YouTube that if you haven't seen it. It's kind of a funny meme reference to Odysseus here. In any case, Nausicaa's women, her attending servants, run away. She, showing her integrity, perhaps her interest and ability to see beyond what is skin deep, unlike Polyphemus, stays. Odysseus wonders whether he should, as is tradition, run to her knees, grab them, put his hand to her chin, and beg her for supplication. Just think about that. You're a young lady. There's a large, dirty, strange man who runs up to you. What would your reaction be? Stand there and allow him to suffocate you? Or to yourself flee? He decides not to run up to her, but addresses her in language that I think you will find very flattering. He says, Are you a woman, or are you a divine goddess? So beautiful you are. So this dirty, strange, creepy man has some pretty words to him, and she decides, okay, we'll let you have a bath, see what's actually going on with you, and then you can come to my father's house on the hill. But you cannot come with me because the village people will talk. And they'll say, why is Nausicaa leading this strange man when there are so many eligible bachelors from all around here to accompany her, which is actually something that her father, Alcinous, ends up faulting her for. And so within this small story, there is a moment when Nausicaa is alone with Odysseus. We are reliant on Odysseus for the story of what happened. In the same way that we heard earlier in the home of Menelaus in the Odyssey, that Helen had once been alone in Troy with a disguised Odysseus giving him a bath. We are subject there to the limitations of what Helen tells us happened. We don't know all that happened, perhaps we do. Same thing here with Odysseus, and so commentators often suggest that Nausicaa clearly has an attraction to Odysseus, and once he bathes, the gods make him taller, thicker, and make his hair curlier, and so that he looks far more fetching to this young lady. And keep in mind, this is a war hero, a big, powerful, athletic man who is perhaps very different from the sorts of people that Nausicaa had been exposed to growing up. So shoot over to Bloom. I asked you last time we spoke what your perception of what Bloom looked like must have been. And very few people's eyes got wide and popped up when I asked whether you thought he were handsome. Turns out, through the eyes of Gertie McDowell, this young, winsome Irish lass, the Bloom stands out. Not only is he tall, which speaks for himself. In fact, there are studies that suggest that men that have less symmetry in their faces but are over 6'3" are still perceived as equally, if not more attractive to men with more symmetrical faces. You may know that symmetry is something that both butterflies and humans look for in partners. So all the more interesting if somebody is non-symmetrical and they're found attractive, there's something else about them, therefore. In any case, Bloom is tall. Bloom also looks exotic, but not exotic in a strange way, but exotic in a dark and handsome sort of way, at least to Gertie McDowell. In the same ways that we have heard that he is different in character, he even looks different from those around him. And when I say he stands out, he's taller. He is perhaps better looking than those around him. He stands out all the more. A young lady looking at him sees him in the same way that the protagonist in the pornographic novel Sweets of Sin that Bloom has picked up for Molly sees Raoul, this foreign, dark stranger who is the love object of the female protagonist in the Sweets. of sin. And so this is, again, a young lady observing an older, strange, foreign man in very much a positive light, but who happens to be married and needs to go on his merry way. A difference, or at least a difference insofar as the information we received from the Odyssey, is that Bloom here, in his loneliness, in his absence of physical connection with Molly, in his humiliation at what must have happened, himself acts in a manner of substitution. In the same way that Molly has been denied the conjugal embrace of Bloom for 10 years, and now reaches out for Blazes Boylan to fill the void, as it were, of Bloom. So have we noticed Bloom attempting in his own way to fill the lacking romance and physical intimacy in his life. He is now engaged in a writing correspondence with one Martha Clifford, a lady typist, who calls him a naughty boy and asks that he send the type of perfume that his wife wears to her, a very trifling sort of thing. But now also he engages in the act of onanism, the act of masturbation, furtively, while looking at at Gertie McDowell, while she basks in the male attention that he gives to her. And yet, for all this moment of glory, as it were, it leaves him cold and clammy. All that for nothing. Here is perhaps the true message of the story of Onan. All that for nothing. Bold hands, Mrs. Marion. He immediately thinks of Blazes Boylan and his wife. When he comes back down to reality from the exaltation of the bliss of self-fondling, he immediately is confronted with the reality that he attempted to replace and escape for a moment. Mrs. Marion, did I forget to write address on that letter, like the postcard I sent to Clips, the letter in return to Martha Clifford? And the day I went to Dremmy's without a necktie, wrangle with Molly, it was, put me off thinking about domestic things, thinking about Molly, thinking about his wife. No, I remember Richie Goulding, he's another, weighs on his mind. Funny, watch stopped at 4:30. This is sometimes seen as the evidence that there's some sort of psychological, magical connection between the act of infidelity on Molly's part and Bloom's watch. Watches can sometimes be interesting objects / characters in works. You say watch Will Ferrell, Maggie Gyllenhaal, Stranger Than Fiction. But watch has quite a pivotal place to play in that plot. In any case, funny, watch stopped at 4:30. Dust, shark liver oil they used to clean. Could do it myself. Save. Is that just when she? Presence by absence has never been quite so pregnant as he, she. What is that comma doing exactly there? Connecting he and she. This is part of the mastery of James Joyce. Oh, he did. Into her. She did. Done. I think it takes very little literary imagination to see what is being described in these final two lines, but also to feel the poignant horror and incipient pain of the implication of these lines. It happened, the thing I dreaded. And it leaves Bloom in a state of disorientation. In any case, moving to chapter 14, the Oxen of the Sun, we move now not 1 but 2 hours, from 8 p.m. to 10 p.m. Starting to get a little bit late. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this chapter, as I'm not going to spend a lot of time on chapter 15 due to time constraints, but one thing I will say about this chapter is that Richard Ellman, the biographer of James Joyce, said that over a course of 3 months, James Joyce spent 1,000 hours constructing this chapter. And keep in mind that there are only 168 hours in a week. So he spent quite a bit of time over those 3 months doing this. This is sometimes called a ferruginous chronicle because in this very much pregnant chapter, James Joyce attempts to do two very dynamic things. He includes every style of English prose that existed from old, or at least from Middle English, down through Shakespearean, through Victorian, Edwardian at his time. And he does this in order to draw a parallel between the genealogy of the evolution of language and the sort of autogenealogy of the development of a human embryo. So where is this chapter set? Set in a hospital. Hospital where what is happening? Where Mina Purefoy, who we heard about from Mrs. Bree, who has been in labor for 3 days, and Bloom thinks that's awful, he goes to see her because this is the sort of person that Bloom is. And he's either waiting in a residence call room or in a waiting room alongside a very much drunk Stephen Dedalus and his crony friends. Stephen Dedalus, who was not during the during the Scylla and Charybdis chapter, invited to a literary party put on by one Mr. Moore. But Buck Mulligan was, and so was Haynes, but Haynes doesn't make it. Haynes has a way of never quite being there at the right time in this text. And so, also in this chapter, it itself tries to mimic the genealogy of a human as well as of human language through the example of English. So does Mina Purefoy finally have her child. And so there is something here, some comments both on the masculine art of creation in terms of creation of art, which is the only sort of creation, traditionally speaking, that males have access to, and also sort of the anxiety, and this is very much an anxiety present in the Odyssey of paternity, as it were. Whereas it can be very easy for a mother to know that she is mother to child, though there are some scary instances of children going to the wrong parents from maternity hospitals, as it were. It is the case that a man needs at least genetic testing in order to know whether he is father. And this is something that Telemachus plays on when he is asked whether Odysseus is his father. He says, well, people claim that I am his son, but who really knows who his father is? And this is sort of a self-disparaging high school emo way of him saying, well, my father's a great man, I'm not yet, and so maybe I'm his son, maybe I'm not. Though he is told over and over again by Odysseus' friends, Nestor and Menelaus, and he looks like Odysseus. His hands and feet look like Odysseus's hands and feet, and that he even speaks like Odysseus. And so, in any case, Bloom and Stephen meet in the hospital in an intern's waiting room. Stephen and his friends are already boisterously drunk. They travel to here from Burke's pub. Bloom observes Stephen and thinks he is the best of the lot. And so, sort of an interesting sort of paternal coach, sort of teacherly feeling to be evaluating the young, as it were. Mina Purefoy, who in her 3rd day of labor has had her child in the middle of the chapter finally. James Heffernan explains this chapter as being structured to parallel the process of gestation or autogenesis of a human fetus, and also to pay heed to the history and development of the English language. 2 things about this that I wish to mention to you. For all the glory of autogenesis, of the creation of a human through the pregnancy of woman, is this a conscious act on the woman's part? I'm not saying the act that generates the initial process, that may or may not be itself, but the process of gestation, like the process of digestion, is something that the body does, that happens unconsciously. Sometimes people look at art as something that is purely conscious. I think here what you see is that James Joyce is making the claim, especially after having spent 3 months really mulling over this chapter, that the act of literary creation, the act of artistic creation, partakes just as much of the motherly art of unconscious generation of something with life and substance, as much as from the sort of paternal art of consciously, rationally putting something together. That one, and I would say this even when you write very highly conscious term papers, there is just a certain genesis in your mind that happens when you wrestle with thoughts over time. You all of a sudden find yourself struck by ideas that you would not have normally had you not spent time really in depth ingesting and digesting them. That there are non-conscious elements to creating, to thinking, to being even. As you know, we have very much a prejudice in the West for being, for rationalization, and for being conscious. The unconscious processes, and you see this through drug prohibitions largely, are things that we fear. And we don't even necessarily want to study them and how they have, and what factors they play in our own lives. In any case, moving on to 15, Circe of Nighttime. I didn't require that you read this chapter, mostly because in the 1961 version of this text, it is 181 or 182 pages long, and also takes on the form of a closet drama. A closet drama is a drama that is not meant to be acted, but to be read. So this is called Circe of Nighttime. Recall Circe is the name that I mentioned earlier when I talked about two of the women that Odysseus spends 1 to 7 years sleeping with. Circe is the sea witch that he spends 1 year with on the Isle of Aiaia. And yes, Aiaia, because the name of her isle is modeled off of the sound of a scream. And also Calypso, he spends 7 years with. Circe has a very unique power. When Odysseus's men approach her, she feeds them food, she takes her wand, she bops them on the head, they become pigs with the minds of humans. If you've ever seen Spirited Away, voila, now you understand it even more. And the connection between Eastern and Western myths and their intermingling that's been so profound over the past 30 years, as it were. In any case, when Odysseus approaches Circe, the god Hermes gives him a plant called moly, which is both black and white, and he eats it. He then eats Circe's food. She tries to bop him on the head to turn him into a pig, and he stays a man. Takes his sword, demands that she free his men. She says, after you sleep with me. I suppose tell that Homer is very much a male author in this way. Odysseus does so, eats again, and then his men are turned back into humans. You see, in the same way that Odysseus does not eat lotus, doesn't take a drug, the same way that he listens to the sirens but doesn't deal with the after effects. Odysseus finds ways to keep his head about him. And in fact, when he returns to Ithaca, this is what Athena says that she loves most about him. The thing that makes him beloved to her is not some sort of paternal or rather family relationship. The fact that he stays conscious. How does this relate to Bloom and Nighttown? Well, in Nighttown, we go to a house of ill repute, a brothel, a whorehouse, just to go down the registers. And here, Stephen is going to try and spend the last of the money that he has made, while Bloom follows him soberly in order to attempt to take care of him, because Stephen has gotten blind drunk and is looking to cast his oats to the wind. The chapter begins. The Map Street entrance of Nighttown, before which stretches an uncobbled tram-siding set with skeleton tracks. Red and green will-o'-the-wisps. Will-o'-the-wisps are called fatuous igni. Empty flames. That's what a will-o'-the-wisp, like an empty promise. And they lead one to perdition within swamps, just to give you the idea of what this sort of place is, a place of perdition and to be lost. Will-o'-the-wisps and danger signals, rose grimy houses with gaping doors, sort of a hellish New Orleans-esque image in some ways. Rare lamps with faint rainbow fans, round raviotis, halted ice gondola, stunted men and women swap stunted. They grab wafers, between which are wedged lips of coral and copper snow. Notice the alliteration. Sucking, they scatter slowly children. The swung hum of the gondola high-reared forges, that imagery, that infernal imagery of a forge, on through the murk, white and blue under a lighthouse, whistles call and answer to their noises. A couple things just about the modernism of this chapter. In the same way that Odysseus has moly, which keeps him from devolving into an animal when touched by the wand of Circe, so has Bloom his trusty potato that has been in his pocket. And while one of the prostitutes of the house is attempting to fondle him, she finds his potato and says, "Oh, did you have that for me?" Obviously thinking the potato is another piece of his anatomy at first, but then she takes his potato. When she takes his potato, his grip on reality slips, and this text becomes far more of a phantasmagoria. What is real and what is dream becomes mixed together in a very much a quixotic fashion that makes it very difficult to maintain the line of the narrative. It's a vastly difficult chapter to read and make sense of. That said, during this phantasmagoria, Bloom actually gets sort of dominated in a sadomasochistic way by the so-called lady of the house, the one Bella Cohen. And this same Bella Cohen turns into, in a transgender sort of way, a Bello Cohen, and Bloom takes on then the role of the woman. They swap genders at one particular time. Not to mention the fact that there is a tremendous bit of masochism. At one point, Bloom sees not only his father, who blames him for his apostasy and leaving the faith, though it was, in fact, Rudolph Bloom, the father of Bloom, who first left the faith in order to marry his wife, who was a Higgins, very much not a Jewish name. Then Bloom also tortures himself by seeing an image of 8 children. 8 children he could have had in Eton suits, very expensive suits, speaking 5 modern languages in themselves. We see his unconscious totally exposed, speaking a Jungian or Freudian way. We see his hopes, his former hopes, and what he might have hoped from his life, while also we see the things that he carries with himself that are negative to himself. He also finds himself castigated by various women in his life, women that he has so-called, that he has ogled, like Ernie McDowell, or a woman in the street who he was trying to see until Nosy Flynn bothered him while she was walking into a carriage. Something, even though he has not had conjugal embrace with his wife, we know from him looking at the statue of Venus, from ogling Gertie McDowell, as well as self-fondling himself, that it is not the plumbing that is at issue, it is the operating system, as it were. There's something between him and Molly that is keeping them from coming back together. It is not as if either one of them has any problem with the act itself. In any case, when we return to reality, Stephen accidentally hits a chandelier, causing some damage to it. Bella Cohen attempts to overcharge him money, but regaining his potato and then his wits, Leopold Bloom says, "No, actually, this is just a 10 shilling charge. This is a much smaller charge than what you are claiming." She admits some admiration of Bloom keeping his wits, and then he and Stephen are off. Once they're outside, they run into 2 police officers, or rather, excuse me, 2 British military officers. And Stephen sort of finds this moment to be extremely drunk and pontificate on the value of having a king. He's then sworn at by one of the officers who says, "I'll beat the blood and stuffing out of any effing person who speaks against my king." You know, the sort of talk that a gruff, vulgar, potentially drunken man might speak to another in the wee hours of the morning. And he actually ends up punching Stephen in the face. The police arrive, but Bloom, using his knowledge of a local police informant, gets keeps Stephen from being arrested by suggesting that the boys are just being the boys. And the police just sort of nod and agree with that. The last thing that he sees, though, which is heart-wrenching, is that he sees a fairy boy of about 11. Reading from right to left and kissing the page. Just a couple things about that image is that a fairy boy, there's a very famous poem by Goethe called Der Erlkönig, which is sometimes translated as the elf king, but it means the older king, the older king. So by metonymy, like the older race is like the elven race, as it were, in the same way that the Presbyterians, their name from Greek literally means the elders, as it were. But the image of the elf king is of stealing the soul of a young person, particularly a young boy. And so why does Rudy appeal as an elfin boy? His soul has been stolen because he has only been allowed to age in the realm of elves, which is the realm of the imagination, right? Not the true realm of reality, as it were. And this realm, reality, similar roots right there, comes from Latin re, which means a thing. To reify something means to make it real, to make it into a thing, to thing it, as it were. But so he sees what Rudy could have been. Rudy only exists in the space of Nighttown, in the space of drunken revelry, in this place of the unconscious or of dreams that he has developed, but not in the world that we would have chosen. Who would give up their real relationship with one they love for the dream of what one loves? Perhaps us. In any case, we move on to 16 and to the Nostos. And so as I bring it home, we will be at home, as it were. The Nostos, it comprises 3 chapters: Eumaeus, Ithaca, and Penelope. Eumaeus is himself a swineherd of Odysseus, who is one of his slaves, who was given freedom after being one of the 2 herdsmen that assist Odysseus in the retaking of his house. Just keep in mind these odds. Odysseus, son to Telemachus, Eumaeus, and an ox herd named Philautus. It's Odysseus. Odysseus is the only fighter. 2 are older slaves, and 1 is a young man who has not known combat. Versus 108 suitors and their 12 servants, as well as several maids who have gone team suitor and are now sleeping with the suitors, as it were. These 4 individuals defeat the 108, as it were, and Eumaeus is based off this. The location of the Eumaeus chapter is in the cabman shelter that serves inedible buns and undrinkable coffee, and is run by a character who is himself called Skin the Cat, who did something like 20 years of hard labor for being the getaway man for the Fenians, who were themselves a sort of rebel political group among the Irish after they did a murder. In any case, here in this cab shelter, Bloom is described as Stephen's fetus Activities. His friends, Stephen's friends, when he got into his scruff, they ran away. Bloom, Mulligan, Stephen Lynch, all of these characters ran away. And so later he says, and that one was Judas. His friends are like Judas, the betrayer of Jesus, the apostle. Judas Iscariot, for 30 pieces of silver, sold out Jesus to the Roman authorities and gave up his location to them. And Stephen says this about those who have been his friends, which will be the basis for Bloom giving some fatherly advice. Maybe Stephen should find some new friends who don't leave him alone to lose all of his money in the middle of a brothel in the middle of the night. It is now 1 a.m. Note also that Bloom tries to give him coffee, tries to feed him food. It's disgusting food like to find at 1 a.m., but he attempts to feed him. He also finds out in his flabbergasted that Stephen, though he had a little toast in the morning, has not eaten dinner for over 24 hours. He never had dinner, and even his lunch was whiskey, right? So he's really been spending most of his time drinking, not eating. This shocks fatherly paternal Bloom. In any case, we also have a false figure of Odysseus here through one sailing Irishman named W.B. Murphy, who himself has a tattoo of a Greek sailor on his chest and tells all sorts of interesting stories, like about a man being stabbed in the back by an Italian, and of crocodiles eating the moors of ships, and even of a shark eating a man. These are the sorts of stories you might hear in a drunken bar from an old man at 1 a.m. Are they true? or are they false? Are questions that we wonder. And in fact, who is the figure of Odysseus in this chapter? Is it this lying sailor who has seen the world and tells these tales, or is it paternal Bloom, who is attempting to get this Telemachus-like Stephen Dedalus, who is himself out of his wits, back to some sort of home? In any case, a little bit more of the physicality of this text as they leave the shelter and take a carriage towards Bloom's home, 7 Eccles Street, very famous for its name, the same as 221 Baker, or 221B Baker Street is for Sherlock Holmes, towards Bloom's home. The horse stops and drops 3 smoking globes of turd. So we've seen defecation, we've seen micturition, we've seen self-fondling in this text. We've now seen also horses defecating. This adds to the realism of things that happen during the course of the day, things that we often try and hide that happen during the course of the day. Chapter 17 is in some ways the most anticlimactic chapter in English literature. Finally, does Bloom take Stephen to Bloom's own home? And finally, did the 2 main characters that we've been waiting all day to meet each other and talk to each other have a chance to talk? And when they do talk, we are kept from this conversation by 2 different media. One, the fact that Stephen is drunk. So if I were to exhort you, it would be to, if you find somebody interesting, speak to them when you have the presence of your wits, when you are most yourself, rather than when you are least yourself and most unfortunate. The second thing that gets in the way is that this chapter is entirely narrated to us by a catechist in catechistic format. The catechistic format was an educational format used by the Catholic Church in order to teach young students facts about Christianity. Often the joke about Catholics is that they read the catechism, they do not read the Bible. The catechism is constructed in question-answer format, very similar to what Thomas Aquinas also makes famous in the Summa Theologiae. Question, answer. So here we do not get direct narrative and dialogue. We get question and answer about what is discussed between Stephen and Bloom. Why is this? How is this itself an absence, or what does this deny to us? It denies to us the personal connection of actually being the voyeuristically viewing the conversation itself in the way that we were not denied, or the ways we were not denied in the first 16 chapters. Here we only get what happens through description rather than narrative itself. And so in the moment when these 2 individuals find themselves closest together, we find ourselves farthest from the narrative itself. So what do they talk about? They compare their ages, 38 to 22. Bloom used to have another job as a cattle salesperson. Bloom's books are mentioned, including Spinoza's writing and Strength and How to Obtain It, which is by one of the original strongmen from the 19th century, a German named Eugen Sandow. So apparently Bloom, who is kind of buff, as well as tall and handsome, as it were. He once drew up a plan for Irish independence. Notice Irish independence, not Jewish independence. He is not a Zionist. He is Irish, and in fact sees connections between the plight of the Irish and the Jews, but takes the side of the Irish, as it were. He is what he claims to be. He thinks Maimonides, Spinoza, and Moses Mendelssohn are preeminent intellects, are Jewish. Stephen writes Irish letters. Bloom Hebrew ones, showing their sort of differing histories, though there are claims since debunked that Old Irish and Hebrew come from the same source. They consider whether aliens on another planet would be saved, is of course what you would expect them to talk about each other. And then they micturate together. They pee together before Stephen says no to Bloom's offer to stay the night, and Stephen leaves. Where is Stephen going? We don't know, and we never find out. The second part of the Ithaca chapter focuses on Bloom making his way back up to Molly. We find that his suicide note of his father that he still keeps with him. He considers whether joining Molly in bed. He questions divorce. Not now, not now, not ever. He kisses Molly on the rump, which is something he likes to do. And we get confirmation that it has in fact been 10 years, 5 months, 18 days since carnal intercourse had been incomplete. And he thinks of Sinbad as he falls asleep. I'm just going to quote from Molly here at the end. The first thing that she says starts with yes, and the last word that she has is yes. And so, yes, because this is chapter 18, Penelope, who's renowned for her faithfulness, and yet we know Molly today has been faithless, and so there was a deeply ironic connection. And then yes, because he never did a thing like that before. He was asked to get his breakfast in bed with a couple of eggs since the City Arms Hotel, when he used to be pretending to be laid up with 6 boys, doing his highness to make himself interesting for that old F word, Mrs. Riordan, that he thought he had a great leg up. There are only something like 3 periods in the entirety of this chapter, so its form is very much modernist and formalist in that respect. But you do notice that apparently she heard Bloom as asking for breakfast in bed like he gave to her, and she's going to do it. And so has Bloom in entering the bed, a bed that is so special because Odysseus constructed his bed, which could move, not be moved within Ithaca. Has Bloom, in coming home, reasserted his authority? Has he taken back his bed and his role as husband? Is that what she making a meal for him indicates in the morning, same way that he had made a meal for her the morning before and inverted the sort of gender roles? In any case, this ends, the text ends with, oh, and the sea crimson, sometimes like fire, and the glorious sunsets, and the fig trees and the Alameda gardens, yes, and all the queer little streets, and the pink and blue and yellow houses, and the rose gardens and the jessamine and geraniums and cactuses, and Gibraltar as a girl, where she's from, where I was as a flower of the mountain, yes, when I put the rose in my hair like the Andalusian girls used, or shall I wear a red? Yes, and how he kissed me under the Moorish wall, and I thought, him as another. And then I asked him with my eyes to ask again, yes, and then he asked me, would I say yes to say yes, my mountain flower, and first I put my arms around him, yes, she's falling asleep as she says yes, and drew him down to me so he could feel my breasts all perfumed, yes, and his heart was going like mad, and yes, I said yes, I will. Yes, and is this the great affirmation at the end? Does Bloom return to the bed like Odysseus? Does Penelope return to affirmation of their relationship? Yes. In any case, that's all we have. Monday, we're having forum. Looking forward to it.